In Adams, Tennessee, the legend of the Bell Witch has never faded. In the early 1800s, the Bell family was tormented by knocks on the door, disembodied voices, and horrors so relentless that even President Andrew Jackson came to witness them. More than a century later, a young family moved into the old house, convinced it was nothing more than superstition. But when night falls, the knocking returns, cold, deliberate, uninvited, and a lullaby drifts from an empty room, a reminder that the curse has never loosened its grip. The dirt road into the outskirts of Adams was blanketed with brittle leaves and the damp rot of autumn. Behind the wheel, Nathan fixed his gaze on the house that slowly emerged through the oak trees. Beside him, Claire tightened her grip on his hand, while Emma, their young daughter, dozed in the back seat, clutching her warm-knitted doll like a talisman. The house appeared in fragments, then whole, an oppressive silhouette against the dying light. 2 stories of weathered gray wood leaned under a moss-cloaked roof. Its windows, dark and unblinking, resembled hollow sockets in a skull. Though the place had been given a thin coat of repair, it exuded a coldness, a refusal to welcome daylight. Nathan forced a smile, telling himself that the spacious rooms and bargain price made this the perfect beginning for their family. The only neighbor they encountered was a frail old man at the fence line. He paused, his eyes following them with a weary caution. When he finally spoke, it was almost a whisper. "The Bell House never rests." And then he turned away, leaving Nathan bewildered yet eager to dismiss the warning. Claire, however, had heard every word. Her face tightened, though she masked it quickly, unwilling to spread her unease. That evening, they shared their first meal in the wide, draft-ridden parlor. The old oil lamp sputtered, casting a sickly amber glow. From the wall, a portrait loomed. An austere man with cavernous eyes. Emma kept glancing at it, whispering that, "He doesn't want me sitting here." Claire soothed her gently, chalking it up to childish imagination, though her own skin prickled beneath the gaze of that painted stare. When Emma finally drifted into sleep, Nathan and Claire noticed the sounds. At first faint, then deliberate, 3 measured knocks, steady as a heartbeat, echoing through the bedroom wall. Nathan laughed it off, muttering something about pipes. But Claire remained awake, her eyes fixed on the dark ceiling. To her, the rhythm felt less like plumbing and more like a signal, someone knocking patiently from the other side. From the hallway, the wind pressed through the cracks of the doorframe, carrying with it the sharp, earthy scent of soil freshly turned, damp and ancient. The house, silent to the ear, seemed to murmur in its own secret tongue. The new Bell family had come seeking peace. Instead, they had stepped into the echo of a curse that had never truly died. Nash. Oh no. The second night passed, and the knocking returned. This time, it was no longer scattered. 3 sharp knocks in succession, then silence, only to begin again, steady, deliberate, like a hand tapping with patient insistence on the walls themselves. Claire stirred awake, her body stiff with unease. Nathan still slept deeply, but she knew at once these were not pipes, not branches scraping the roof. The sound carried a weight that seemed to rise from inside the house itself. Slipping from bed, she crept down the hallway. The house was a cavern of shadow, moonlight spilling weakly through dust-streaked windows. As she neared Emma's room, Claire froze, heart pounding. From within came a lullaby. A woman's voice, soft, steady, humming a tune worn thin by time. The melody was slow, trembling, soaked in the drawl of the Old South. The bedroom door stood ajar. Claire pushed it open an inch and saw Emma sound asleep, clutching her ragged doll to her chest. The child's lips were still, yet the lullaby continued, rising from the empty rocking chair by the window. Claire slammed the door shut, clutching her chest, and did not dare close her eyes again until morning. By dawn, Nathan was too busy unpacking to notice the hollows under her eyes. He only laughed, insisting she was letting the house get to her. But when Claire carried breakfast to the table, her blood ran cold. The rocking chair in Emma's room, no longer in its corner, now faced the bed directly, as though someone had sat there all night, watching. The day brought no comfort. Picture frames slid from walls without a draft. A chair swayed gently, though the floor was still. And Emma, while playing alone, whispered to her mother that she had seen a lady in a white dress step through the bathroom mirror. Claire steadied her voice and asked if the woman had a face. Emma shook her head. No, she never turns around. That evening, Nathan finally saw what Claire feared. As he sat reading in the parlor, the window burst open, though the night outside was breathless and still. A gust of cold air tore through, flinging the book from his hands. And in that fleeting moment, as he bent to retrieve it, he swore he saw her. A pale figure in a long white dress, hair falling like a curtain, gliding across the mirror's surface before vanishing with the blink of an eye. That night, the lullaby returned. Its ghostly cadence swelled through every room, wrapping around them like a shroud. Nathan gathered his wife and daughter close, straining to appear unshaken. Yet in the pit of his stomach, the old man's words returned. The Bell House is never at rest. And when the clock struck 12, the knocking began again. 3 heavy raps, not from the walls this time, but from the bedroom door itself. Someone, unseen, was waiting patiently in the hallway, asking to be let inside. Nah, wow. In the days that followed, the Bell family home offered Nathan's household not a single moment of peace. The knocking grew constant, echoing at all hours, sometimes frantic, sometimes measured, like an unseen hand drumming out its own deliberate rhythm. Claire bore the brunt of it. One evening, while preparing dinner, she heard a faint whisper right behind her. A woman's voice, fragile, repeating her name again and again and again. She spun around, nothing but the empty kitchen. Yet the mirror above the sink had gone cloudy, the glass fogged as though someone had breathed against it. And in its surface she did not see herself, but a woman in a white dress, standing motionless, hair spilling forward to hide her face. Claire screamed, dropping the fork from her hand. The clatter brought Nathan running, but by the time he arrived, the mirror was clear again. He tried to soothe her, though his own nerves betrayed him. The air in the house seemed heavier now, thick with the weight of unseen eyes. Emma, however, treated the presence as if it was something natural. She told her father that the lady only walks through the mirrors, she doesn't hurt anyone. Then she added a detail that made Nathan's blood run cold. She keeps calling my name, really soft, like she's trying to sing me to sleep. On the 5th night, the haunting came for Nathan himself. He dreamed of the house as it had stood in the 1800s. Riders on horseback gathered outside, one of them a man whose face he recognized from history books, President Andrew Jackson. The man's voice cracked like thunder in the dream. You cannot escape. The Bell Witch has never left. Nathan woke with a jolt, drenched in sweat. And at once, 3 sharp knocks reverberated through the wall beside his bed. The next morning, shaken, he went to the town library. He dug through brittle clippings and fading records, piecing together the old legend, the mysterious knocks, the disembodied voices, objects hurled across rooms, sudden deaths. There it was in ink. Andrew Jackson had indeed come to this house, but fled after a single night, declaring it too cursed even for him. Nathan carried the papers home, spreading them across the table. Claire paled as she read, while Emma traced her small fingers across photographs of the old Bell home. That was when the mirror in the parlor rattled violently, a sharp crack splitting the silence. They all turned. The glass shivered, misting over, and a sentence scrawled itself in crooked strokes, as though carved by a finger no one could see. I never left. No one dared breathe a word. The silence pressed down, broken only by the pounding of their own hearts. And then she appeared again. The woman in white drifted across the mirror's surface, visible to all 3 at once. Her face remained hidden, but her presence swept through the room like a frost. Only then did the family understand. They were not merely living in an old house. They had stepped directly into the heart of a curse, and the way out was already beginning to close. Ow! The nightmares had bled from history into the present. Night after night, the Bell house grew heavier with dread. At sunset, the air turned unnaturally cold. Breath rose in clouds. Knocks rolled along the walls, mingling with whispers that made no sense in any human tongue. Nathan fought to keep calm. He locked every window, checked every room, but nothing stopped it. Claire was wasting away, her face hollow, eyes bruised from sleepless nights. She no longer only heard the lullaby. Now she felt a frozen hand settle on her shoulder whenever she stood alone in the kitchen. She would spin around and find nothing, only the wooden chair, always turned toward her, as if someone had been sitting there all along. One night, Emma woke in tears. She pointed at the bedroom mirror, sobbing. She's looking at me, she's in the mirror, but her eyes are sewn shut. Claire rushed to hold her daughter, but when she lifted her gaze to the glass, she saw it too. The pale face of the woman in white, her eyes crudely stitched with black thread, her mouth stretched open, as though to swallow every sound in the room. Nathan, panicked, yanked the blanket from the bed and covered the mirror. But the moment he did, the lullaby rose again, this time right at his ear. The melody twisted, warping into a broken hymn, layered with the faint cries of children. A crushing weight pressed down on his chest, stealing his breath, until Claire's frantic screams of his name shattered the grip. At dawn, they resolved to take Emma away, to stay with friends in town. But at the door, the child collapsed into terrified sobs. She won't let me leave. Every door seized shut at once, unmoving even under Nathan's desperate force. The lights flickered, then died, plunging the house into pitch darkness. From the hallway came footsteps, bare feet, measured, steady, drawing closer. Nathan pulled Claire and Emma tight against him, but from the mirror in the parlor, still shrouded in the blanket, came a piercing crack. Glass split open, not to reveal wood beneath, but a hollow yawning dark, like the mouth of a gate. From within poured the lullaby, clearer, louder, layered in a chorus of voices. Dozens of them, women's voices, some young, some ancient, each intoning the names of the Bell family across the generations. Emma's gaze locked onto the fracture. Her body trembled as though pulled forward. Claire clutched her tighter, sobbing, while Nathan tried to drag them away. But his legs had grown heavy, as if the house itself was rooting him to the floor. And in that moment, Nathan understood. This was not the work of a single spirit. They were ensnared in an inheritance of evil, a legacy stretching back to the 19th century. What the Bell family once endured was now reborn, binding them to a curse that had never been broken. That night, as the moon hung pale above the window, the Bell house was no longer a home. It had become a ritual made flesh, where past and present bled into one, and at the center stood Emma, the child whom the voices longed to claim. Kneel bow. The final night began with silence. No knocking, no whispers, only a suffocating stillness draped over the Bell house. Nathan felt his skin crawl. This was no peace. It was the storm crouching low, waiting to break. Emma slept fitfully in her mother's arms. Claire tried to lull her with a soft song, her voice trembling. But halfway through, horror struck her. It was not her lullaby. It was the lullaby, the same dreadful tune that had haunted their nights. The melody wasn't hers. It was being forced through her throat. She stopped at once, clutching Emma tighter, her breath caught in fear. In the darkness, the cracked mirror in the parlor began to split further. New fractures webbed across its surface, glowing faintly like congealed blood. The blanket Nathan had draped over it tore away, flung aside as if ripped by an unseen hand. Nathan charged forward, seized a chair, and hurled it at the mirror. But instead of shattering, the glass swallowed it whole. The chair vanished into the black, leaving not even the sound of impact. From within, a lullaby swelled, clear, harmonious, sung in both a woman's voice and a child's. Emma's eyes snapped open, glassy and vacant. She whispered, "She's calling me." Claire sobbed, clutching her tighter. But a freezing wind surged out of the mirror, whipping their hair, numbing their skin. Nathan wrapped his arms around them both, trying to pull away. But Emma fought violently, with a strength that no child should possess. In the chaos, Claire's grip slipped. Emma broke free. The little girl walked toward the mirror, calm as though stepping into an embrace. Nathan lunged after her, screaming until his voice tore, but he caught only the hem of her dress before her small body passed through the fissure of light. And then, silence. The lullaby ceased. Emma was gone. The mirror sealed itself, the cracks knitting closed until only a flawless pane remained. It reflected back the hollow, broken faces of Nathan and Claire, two parents staring at the space where their daughter had stood. By morning, the police arrived. They found no evidence of intrusion, no forced doors, no broken windows. The house lay quiet, as though nothing had ever happened. Emma was simply gone, leaving Nathan and Claire shattered in their grief. In her bedroom, on the small bed, lay the knitted doll. Its button eyes had been stitched shut with black thread, the work precise, deliberate, like the final act of some invisible hand completing a ritual. And so, in Adams, Tennessee, the curse of the Bell Witch never ended. It only waited for the foolish, for the hopeful, to step inside and feed it anew with fresh souls. Pow! The Appalachia forest sank into darkness as the red moon rose, staining the leaves and earth with a fiery shade of blood. The wind howled through the withered pines, twisting like eerie fingers, while the mist revealed ancient trees whose silhouettes resembled human figures. A forgotten village from the 18th century emerged faintly among the woods. Roofs collapsed, doors hanging loose, gravestones covered in moss. Whispers drifted through the air, stirring the uneasy sense that someone, or something, was watching every step. Beneath the blood moon, strange markings on the ground seemed to beckon any curious soul into the land of the dead. The group of hikers pressed deeper into the forest. What began as a weekend adventure had turned into something else entirely. GPS signals had vanished, and paper maps proved useless under the dense canopy. Daniel, their leader, scanned the surroundings with a trembling flashlight. A thin veil of mist wrapped around their legs, twisting into distorted human shapes. Heartbeats, quickened by fatigue and fear, pulsed in rhythm with the shrill cries of insects in the night. They pushed through ancient trees, until, half hidden by thickets, the village appeared. Roofs caved in, walls rotted, windows shattered. The damp earth beneath their boots was thick with roots and with footprints, strange ones that belonged neither to man nor beast. Daniel crouched, touching the soft soil, and found deep claw marks, as if something had been digging. The air carried a stale mix of mildew and long-burned smoke, forcing the hikers to wrinkle their noses. The village seemed abandoned by time itself. On cracked walls, faint images lingered, drawn in charcoal or dark red ink. Overlapping circles, crooked crosses, and warped human figures. Daniel's flashlight swept across them, and a chill ran down his spine. The silence was so absolute that even their breaths sounded magnified, echoing in the wilderness. Scattered graves appeared around the village, stones mottled with moss, carvings worn thin by centuries. Yet their shapes were unsettling. Many stones stood upright, carved with twisted faces, mouths frozen open in a scream. The sight halted the group in their tracks. Daniel realized something strange. Every grave was turned toward the village center, where the blood moon shone directly on an empty square. The sky darkened further. The red moon climbed higher, bathing everything in its crimson glow. Daniel raised a hand to stop the group. The air seemed to shrink, the wind whistling through broken roofs in a ghostly chorus. A chill rippled from the nape of their necks to their toes, rooting them in place. They decided to set camp at the edge of the village, knowing each step beyond might awaken something unforeseen. As they built a fire, the moonlight flickered through the cracked roofs, glinting off rotting wooden statues, twisted human shapes, as if watching. Daniel's eyes darted around, widening. A strange sensation crept over him. This was no ordinary abandoned village, but a place suspended between present and past, where curses from the 18th century still lingered. The hiss of wind, the rustle of dry leaves, and fleeting shadows weaving among the ruins pressed on their nerves. Each hiker felt it. This was not just being lost in the forest. They had stepped into something alive, something watching, something waiting. As the blood moon illuminated the village square, Daniel exhaled heavily. They were lost, not in mere darkness, but in a darkness thick with blood and an ancient curse. The night deepened. The blood moon hung over the treetops, painting everything in the village with its crimson light. The hikers strained their eyes, every small sound now warped and uncanny. Rustling leaves, snapping branches, strange shuffles in the undergrowth. All of it felt like someone was gliding just beyond their vision, always too quick to catch. Daniel led the way, his flashlight sweeping over the ruined houses. On the rotting wooden beams, he noticed strange markings, overlapping circles, crosses, and distorted human figures. They were not decorations, but signs of an ancient ritual, as if a cult had once used them to claim territory and ensnare victims. A shiver ran down his spine as he realized. All the symbols pointed toward the village square, where the blood moon cast its full glow on a massive stone slab. A faint hiss rose from the forest. The group whipped around, flashlights cutting through the trees, but they saw only leaves trembling. It wasn't the wind. The hiss grew longer, woven into the rustling of the forest, and their hearts began to pound. One of them, Emily, felt an urge to walk into the woods, her feet sliding over dry leaves without her will. Daniel seized her arm, but the pull remained, a force invisible yet insistent, dragging her toward the dark. They moved around the village, clinging close together. But under the blood moon, even the smallest gestures grew distorted. Tree shadows danced across walls, broken roofs seemed to sway, and the rotten wooden statues turned ever so slightly when no one was watching. The stench of damp earth and acrid smoke thickened, filling their noses and throats, leaving them nauseous and dizzy. At the square's center stood the moss-covered stone. Daniel leaned in close and saw old traces, dried bloodstains, knife-scratched grooves, and deeply carved circles. The very same symbols he had once seen in history books. Each circle was like a demonic eye watching, each incision a reminder. This was where ancient rituals had taken place. The wind rose, and the whispers grew louder. They were no longer faint or vague, but hundreds of voices murmuring at once, incomprehensible yet chilling enough to freeze the spine. Emily trembled, clutching Daniel's hand, when suddenly a shadow swept past the forest's edge, swift and fleeting. It was impossible to tell whether it was a cultist or the ghost of an ancient villager, but it was enough to warn them. They were no longer safe. Daniel's breath hitched as the truth dawned. The blood moon was not a natural phenomenon. It was a signal, a time for the ritual to begin. The markings on beams and stone, the whispers in the air, all were preparing for one purpose: to summon the dead and claim the living who had strayed into the village. The group hurried back toward their campsite, but the path was no longer the same. Houses now bore new walls and corridors that had not existed before, as if the village itself was alive, shifting, breathing, building its own labyrinth. The whispers grew nearer, seeping through cracks in the wood, slipping into their ears with no resistance. Emily glanced back, and her eyes widened. Cloaked figures emerged between the trees, faint yet undeniable. They carried sharp objects, their movements gliding noiselessly among the trunks. Daniel yanked her forward, breath shallow. Every step pressed by the terror that slowing down even once would mean a cultist's hand reaching for them. That night, none of them slept. They sat huddled around the dim fire, listening to the wind and the whispers. Every sound carried an unspoken warning. They had stepped into the domain of the Blood Moon Covenant. And as the crimson light bathed the village, one truth grew undeniable. The ritual was about to begin. There was no turning back. Every step forward would be a step into the living darkness, where the blood moon shone on horrors waiting to rise. None. Eerie. The red moon hung high, bathing the abandoned village in a light the color of blood. The forest was so silent that even the rustle of leaves thundered, while whispers seeped from the crumbling walls, now sharp and clear, hundreds of ancient voices murmuring at once. The hikers froze in the center of the square, each step feeling hunted by invisible eyes. From the edge of the forest, shadows emerged. At first, faint and fleeting. But then clearer. Figures in dark cloaks, clutching sharp objects, glided among the trees without sound. They did not shout, did not rush forward. They moved calmly, as though they already knew every action their victims would take. Daniel pulled Emily and Mark close, his flashlight trembling over the square. On the stone slabs, old blood had dried thick, circles carved deep into their surface. Each mark seemed to radiate a supernatural pulse, breathing life into the empty air. Collapsed beams now sprouted phantom silhouettes. Corridors bent and twisted, reshaping the ruins into a living labyrinth. Every step became uncertain, every exit unreliable. The cultists formed a circle around the square, their steps steady, hands raised in ritual. Daniel realized they were not merely worshipping. They were preparing a rite to summon the ancient villagers once struck down by plague, buried in the earth, and now to turn lost wanderers into sacrifice. A drumbeat sounded, not struck by human hands, but resonating from deep within the ground. And with it, the dead rose. At first faint, half flesh and half smoke, they staggered slowly from graves scattered across the village. Faces twisted, eyes rolled white, mouths opening to chant a song not of this world. Under the blood moon, their bodies turned translucent, bleeding crimson as their limbs jerked like living statues of demons. Emily screamed as one spirit stepped forward, each footfall cracking like shattered glass. Daniel held her close, but there was no escape. Every house, every path bent inward, pulling them back into the square. The labyrinth shifted, breathing with the will of the cult. Whispers filled the cracks of the walls, no longer vague but clear. Come to the blood moon. Join the song. Mark bolted toward a stone slab, hoping to hide. But the moonlight struck him full on, painting his body in crimson. The spirits surged. His limbs stiffened, locked as if bound by unseen chains. Each step of the dead sent tremors through the ground, echoing with cracks that pierced the silence. Mark screamed, but his voice was swallowed by the chorus of hundreds of spirits. Daniel and Emily darted along the square, desperate for an escape. Yet, the blood moon twisted reality itself. Walls shifted. Fallen beams stood upright. Paths bent into loops. The village had come alive to imprison them. Wooden statues turned their faces, eyes glinting like living watchers, tracking every move. Their breath and heartbeat became part of the eerie hymn. At the square's center, an altar appeared, stone slick with moss and dark stains, as though it had always been there, waiting. A cultist lifted Mark and laid him upon it. The old blood on the altar blazed anew under the moonlight. Daniel cried out, rushing forward, but Emily dragged him back. Instinct screamed survival, but the pounding drums, the whispers, and the endless chant swallowed them whole, driving them to their knees in terror and exhaustion. The horror swelled. More spirits crawled from graves, slipped from broken rooftops, and poured into the square. Their bodies warped under the red glow, limbs twisting, mouths stretching, blood oozing not as liquid but as streams of glowing crimson glass. They were no longer human. They had become the living symbols of the ritual, the chains that bound the cult to its ancient curse. Daniel's breath caught. They were no longer outsiders. Every step within the village had bound them closer to the rite. If they escaped, they would be trapped in the labyrinth forever, woven into the eternal hymn of the blood moon. Emily and Daniel pressed themselves against the shadows of the trees, seeking escape, but each step dragged them backward, as if the air itself pulled them in. Mark's weakening screams melded with the chorus, and in that moment, Daniel understood. The Blood Moon Covenant did not merely summon the dead. It transformed the living into instruments of the unending hymn. The blood moon flared over the square, lighting the twisted faces, warped limbs, and deformed bodies that stood like grotesque statues. Daniel and Emily stumbled back, their hearts hammering. They no longer knew which step meant survival, and which meant sacrifice. The air itself exploded with crimson light and the sound of the song, pulling them into a vortex of terror, unlike anything the cursed village had ever seen. Wolinama Dewa. The blood moon lingered in the sky, stretching the night into something no sane mind could fathom. Cold wind screamed through the trees, scattering dry leaves like brittle paper. Moonlight filtered through the branches, casting long, warped shadows across mossy ground. Everything pulsed with the rhythm of the drums from the square, a beat not born of human hands, but of some ancient creature stirring awake. Daniel and Emily raced through the village paths, desperate to avoid the stares of the risen villagers. But the village was no longer fixed. The roads twisted, reshaped with every breath of the cult and every flicker of moonlight. Ruined houses shifted positions, forming walls where none had stood before, trapping them in a living labyrinth. The whispers grew sharper. They were no longer distant, but threading directly into their minds, urging, pulling, threatening. Emily stumbled, and from a broken rooftop, a villager's spirit hurled itself down. Its body was translucent, limbs contorted, eyes glazed white. Each movement cracked like breaking glass. Daniel seized her arm and dragged her onward, heart pounding, lungs burning. From the trees, cultists emerged, gliding like phantoms beneath the blood moon. They did not scream or chase. Their mere presence suffocated, each step pressing on the victim's spirits. Their footfalls droned with eerie resonance, echoing through the broken walls. Daniel realized the red moon and the ritual had transformed the village into a mystic maze, where the rules of the world no longer applied. They darted into a ruined house, moonlight flickering through shattered windows. For a split second, a villager's spirit stood before them, body warped, skin translucent, dark blood seeping like hardened glass. It raised its hand, mouth gaping, releasing a chorus of whispers and chants that clawed at Emily's sanity. She screamed, but her voice did not carry into the night. It echoed only in her own mind, eroding her reason. Daniel pulled her out, but the maze kept shifting. Collapsed walls fell away, opening new paths that always curved back toward the square. And there, they saw the horror. Mark, their companion, laid upon the stone altar. His body was rigid, eyes wide and unblinking. Around him, the villagers bent and twisted, their mouths pouring out the eternal hymn. Mark was no longer human. He had become a new link in the ritual, a living statue beneath the blood moon. Emily lowered her head, tears streaming, but dared not sob. The moonlight illuminated every gesture, as though the choir could sense weakness. Daniel dragged her behind the stones, searching for an escape. But the crimson glow shifted shadows, turning paths into traps. The villagers rose from graves, slipped from rooftops, closing in slowly, relentlessly. Each step cracked like glass shattering. Every scream was swallowed into the hymn's endless void. Daniel's chest tightened with realization. Escape was futile. The labyrinth and the song had already claimed them. Amid the chaos, Emily spotted a moss-covered stone. etched with circles and sigils like those from Daniel's ancient maps. Perhaps a key, perhaps a way out. They rushed to it. Daniel pressed his hand against the icy surface, a shock rippling through his body. But the cult closed in, dark cloaks stretching long in the moonlight, preparing for the next sacrifice. A villager's spirit lunged, claws raking the earth like splintered glass. Daniel and Emily hurled themselves down another path, barely avoiding its touch. The hymn thundered, the cracks reverberated, time itself dissolving into the rhythm. They realized the cult and the spirits hunted not only their bodies, but their minds. With every faltering step, their limbs grew heavier, their will eroded. After endless hours of running through the living maze, they found themselves atop a stone outcropping, overlooking the square. The blood moon burned brighter than ever. The hymn still rang. The villagers' twisted forms swayed with the cultists, all circling the altar. Daniel's breath shuddered as the truth crystallized. Everything obeyed an ancient law. Unless one of them was taken or willingly given a sacrifice, the moon would never set, and the labyrinth would devour them whole. Emily trembled, meeting Daniel's eyes with despair. Their hearts thundered. The cracking footsteps of the spirits grew closer, each sound a reminder. Time was gone. The hunt had not ended. It had only begun, and the blood moon still blazed above, staining every step within the nightmare labyrinth. The blood moon still hung high, glaring down upon the cursed village like a monstrous eye. The living maze of ruins held Daniel and Emily tight, each step dragged back, each breath echoing in the endless hymn. The cracks, the whispers, the haunting chorus of the ancient villages wove together into a relentless symphony of horror. Mark was gone, claimed by the cult, his body rigid, his scream devoured by the void. Daniel caught a glimpse of him upon the stone altar, his skin translucent, crimson blood hardened like fractured glass. A chill sliced down Daniel's spine. He knew then fate had caught them. Without a sacrifice, there would be no escape. Emily pulled Daniel through the twisting paths, but the blood moon warped every ruin into an unending labyrinth. Spirits emerged from rooftops and graves, moving slowly, but with certainty, limbs bent like living statues of demons. The cult stood in a circle, hollow-eyed, their synchronized steps pressing forward, driving the survivors toward the altar. Emily collapsed upon a stone, eyes wide with dread. She knew there was no escape. The drums and chants swelled, dragging body and soul into the ancient hymn. Daniel clutched her, heart hammering, every ounce of strength and will slipping away into the crimson void. Then the spirits lunged. Emily was seized, her body stiffening, skin turning glass-like, blood congealing into crimson crystal. Her limbs twisted as she let out a silent scream. Daniel roared, pulling against the supernatural force, but it was useless. Emily became another living statue beneath the blood moon, her eyes wide, forever locked into the unending chorus. Daniel staggered back, crushed beneath the invisible weight pressing on his chest. He knew the truth. He could be next, or he could escape, doomed to carry the memory forever. Instinct drove him toward the forest's edge. He ran through the shifting maze, the ruins twisting behind him, the crimson light searing every shadow. But the blood moon spared no one. Every tree, every wall seemed to reach, dragging him back into the song. At last, Daniel burst free of the village. The blood moon still burned above, casting its glow on the square where the cult and spirits stood unbroken, as though the ritual had never paused. He turned back and realized the curse remained whole. Those who entered could only leave as sacrifices, or as haunted remnants of what they had seen. He fled into the forest, Emily and Mark etched into his mind, their twisted forms, their wide, silent eyes, their screams devoured by the hymn. The whispers followed him in the wind, promising the blood moon would rise again. The blood moon covenant had never ended, and any who dared step into that place would become the next link in the unholy song. The hissing wind, the cracking echoes, and the crimson light still pulsed within the woods, a warning to all who'd wander into the domain of the ancient curse. Daniel had survived, but the spirits of Emily, Mark, and the villagers would haunt him forever. An endless nightmare beneath the blood moon. Wah! The rain had just stopped when Ethan and Claire arrived at the countryside house. The road behind them glistened in the moonlight, wet and silent, and the woods surrounding the property stood eerily still, as if holding their breath. The couple had been looking forward to this trip for weeks, an escape from the noise of the city, a short getaway to spend time together before life pulled them back into its endless routines. Ethan was the adventurous one, his restless curiosity often pushing him into situations Claire would rather avoid. To him, old places like this house were mysteries waiting to be uncovered, stories carved into the wood and stone. Claire, however, was the cautious soul. Sensitive to her surroundings, she often picked up on feelings or details that Ethan overlooked. Where he saw charm, she sensed shadows. The house looked older than it had in the photos. Its paint was faded, its windows cloudy with age, and the air that greeted them inside was colder than the rain-soaked night. Dust lingered in the hallways, and each step across the wooden floors gave off a faint, tired groan. Not exactly 5 stars, Ethan joked, tossing his bag onto a couch. His voice carried through the empty rooms, echoing faintly like the house was whispering back. Claire forced a smile, but her eyes wandered uneasily. Something about the silence unsettled her. It was the kind that pressed against the ears, making her feel like the house itself was listening. They carried their things upstairs to the bedroom. That was when they saw it. Against the far wall stood a tall mirror, framed in tarnished silver. Its glass cracked faintly along the edges. A thin sheet of dust veiled its surface, yet their reflections shone through clear and sharp. Too sharp. Neither of them noticed as they set down their bags and laughed off the creaks of the old house. That for a brief moment, just a flicker, their reflections didn't move when they did. The house was larger than they expected, yet it felt empty in a way that wasn't comforting. The ground floor stretched out in narrow hallways, leading to rooms that smelled faintly of mildew and dust. The kitchen looked abandoned, its wooden cupboards swollen from years of dampness, and the dining room still held a long table covered with a yellowed lace cloth. The furniture seemed frozen in time, as if the last guests had walked out decades ago and never returned. Upstairs, the bedrooms were simple, bare floors, faded wallpaper peeling at the corners, and that looming mirror in the largest room. It stood almost as tall as the ceiling, like a silent guardian watching over the space. Claire brushed her fingers along the cracked silver frame and shivered. "Feels colder here," she whispered. Ethan laughed it off. Old houses always have drafts. It's just air seeping in. He grinned at her reflection. Besides, now we've got an antique mirror thrown in for free. That night, after settling in, the house began to show its true self. The lights flickered faintly, as if struggling to stay alive. The air inside grew heavier, colder than the night outside. When Claire walked past the mirror before bed, she froze. For a split second, she thought she saw Ethan's reflection still standing in front of it, smiling, while the real Ethan was already lying down on the bed behind her. Her breath caught, but when she blinked, the reflection was normal again. She told herself it was exhaustion. Later, as the couple tried to sleep, faint creaking echoed down the hall, steady, deliberate, like footsteps pacing slowly across the wooden floor. Ethan sat up, listening. "Must be the house settling," he muttered, but even he didn't sound convinced. Claire clutched the blanket tighter. In the corner of the room, the mirror gleamed faintly, reflecting nothing but the dark. "No." The nights inside the house only grew stranger. Each evening, the mirror seemed to pull their attention, its surface always gleaming faintly, even in darkness, as though it had its own source of light. On the second night, Claire awoke to a sound like faint tapping. She turned her head and froze. The mirror was no longer reflecting the room. Instead, it showed a dim hallway that stretched endlessly, darker than anything inside the house. At the far end, a figure stood motionless, its pale face blurred like smeared paint. She blinked, and the reflection was normal again. Ethan, half asleep, brushed it off. Dreams feel real sometimes. Don't scare yourself. But by the third night, even Ethan couldn't deny it. As he passed by the mirror, he stopped. His reflection had stayed behind. It grinned, wide and unnatural, even as Ethan's real face froze in shock. Then, with a blink, the reflection snapped back into sync. He stumbled back, laughing nervously. Must be a trick of the glass. Claire's voice trembled. "No, Ethan, it's not the glass. Something's inside." That evening, the house came alive. Doors creaked open on their own. Shadows moved across the walls without source. Whispers leaked through the hallways, soft and taunting, like laughter carried through the air. The mirror became the center of it all, its surface rippling faintly, as if it were water waiting to be touched. Drawn by both fear and fascination, Ethan couldn't stay away. Claire begged him to leave it alone, but he stepped closer, eyes locked on the shifting reflection. In the glass, the pale figure was back. This time clearer, with hollow eyes, and a mouth twisted in a silent scream. Its hand pressed against the other side of the mirror, and Ethan, trembling, lifted his own to match it. The surface of the mirror shuddered, then gave way like liquid. A skeletal hand shot out, clamping around Ethan's wrist. "Ethan!" Claire screamed, pulling at him. But the grip was too strong. With a violent jerk, Ethan was yanked forward, half his body disappearing into the glass. His eyes widened in terror as he cried out her name, and then, with one last desperate tug, the mirror swallowed him whole. Claire fell to the floor, sobbing, staring at her own reflection. Only this time, Ethan was still there. His face pressed against the inside of the glass, pounding silently, his mouth forming words she couldn't hear. Behind him, the pale figure wrapped its arms around him, dragging him deeper into the endless darkness. She ran, down the stairs, through the front door, into the cold night air. Her footsteps pounded against the dirt road until the house was nothing but a shadow behind her. Claire survived, but survival brought no peace. Days later, safe in her own apartment, she caught herself staring at her bathroom mirror. For a heartbeat, She swore she saw Ethan's face staring back at her from the other side, lips moving soundlessly, eyes filled with the same desperate plea as before. She turned away, trembling, but deep down she knew. Ethan was still there, trapped forever, and the mirror would never stop watching her. Wah! Weeks passed, but Claire never found peace. She avoided mirrors as much as she could, covering them with sheets, turning them to face the wall. But glass was everywhere. Windows, reflections in water, even the screen of her phone at night. Sometimes she thought she saw Ethan's eyes staring back. One morning, scrolling through the news, she froze. An article headline read, "Couple vanishes in countryside house. Only one returns." The photo showed the very house they had rented. Police tape stretched across the front. The article mentioned strange reports from locals about figures in the windows and a mirror that doesn't reflect properly. Claire slammed the laptop shut, but it was too late. The reflection in the black screen lingered just a second too long. Ethan was smiling. Yee.
My name is Dr. Eleanor Vance. I'm 32, former caregiver. Now, missing, or so the reports say. But I'm not gone. Not exactly. Hill House remembers. I never belonged anywhere. Not to my family, not to the world. But one day, a letter arrived from a man named Dr. Montague, a scholar of the paranormal. He wrote, "You are invited to Hill House. You've experienced phenomena. We seek to understand it. Understand it. As if it could be parsed like grammar. As if dread obeyed punctuation." I said yes. Hill House didn't welcome. It observed. It was wrong in all the right ways. Every angle slightly off. Doors that shut by themselves, walls that whispered in drafts. It felt sentient, not haunted, but constructed to haunt. There were 4 of us. The doctor, the laughing heir, Luke, the bright, dazzling Theodora, and me. They didn't know how breakable I was, but Hill House did. The first night pounding on the walls, like fists demanding entry, but the halls were empty. The second, words appeared on my wall. "Help Eleanor come home," written in chalk. A child's hand, but no one confessed. No one else seemed afraid. Theodora laughed. "How sweet," she said. But I wasn't amused. I heard the syntax of possession in those 5 words. Not plea, command. Hill House was speaking to me. By day, I wandered the house. I listened. Its creaks formed patterns. Its silences had intonation. Hill House didn't scream. It suggested. And I began to suggest things, too. That Theodora hated me. That Luke mocked me. That the doctor never intended to let me leave. I started talking to the house. At first, quietly. Then aloud. Then only to the house. One night, I woke to laughter down the hall, then silence, then a child sobbing right beside my bed. No one was there, but my hand was being held. It took me hours to unclench my fingers. They were ice cold. I told the others. They said I'd imagined it, but the house knew. And that night it wrote again. Home. Theodora moved her things out of my room. Luke avoided my gaze. Even the doctor began asking if I was sleeping, if I was... Well, I laughed. Too loudly. Of course I was well. Hill House was the first place I had ever been seen. It heard me, and I heard it. Its architecture matched the blueprint of my mind. Rooms without exit, stairs that turned in on themselves, echoes that spoke first. They told me I had to leave, that the house was affecting me. I agreed. I packed. I smiled. And in the night, I took the car, but I didn't drive away. I drove in circles on the winding path outside Hill House. Again and again, until the wheels left the gravel. until the trees rushed toward me. A whisper right before the crash. Stay he epilogue. They buried my body, said it was suicide, said I was unwell. But they don't understand language, not like I do. Hill House spoke to me. It still does. Now I walk its halls, my footsteps soft against ancient wood. Doors close behind me, not in malice, but greeting. I write messages on walls for the next girl, the next misfit, the next lonely soul who just wants to be heard. I am Eleanor, and this is my sentence. Hill House speaks, and I am its voice. My name is Evelyn Vale. I'm 27, formerly a governess, currently a patient. But I wasn't always this way. It began with a letter, handwritten, wax-sealed, elegant. A wealthy gentleman required someone discreet, educated, and trustworthy to care for 2 orphaned children at his country estate. Bly, 2 children, Flora and Miles. Perfect angels, the uncle said, but their care is entirely yours. I'm never to be contacted. Ever. I should have walked away. But I needed the cheer. Bly was beautiful, but too quiet. I remember my first morning, sunlight pouring across stone floors, the silence holding its breath. Flora was cheerful, dainty, bright-eyed, but oddly rehearsed. Miles had just returned from school, dismissed for unspecified reasons. He was charming, too charming, the kind that knows your boundaries before you speak them. And always that same phrase from them both. We're ever so happy you're here. Too happy. Too identical in tone. Like they'd practiced it. It started on the 3rd evening. I looked up from the garden and saw a man at the tower. Tall, pale, watching. I asked Mrs. Gross, the housekeeper. Her face fell. Mr. Quint, she whispered, but that's not possible. He died a fall on the ice months ago, but I saw him again the next night, closer, through the window. And Flora, who had been playing alone, was staring at him too. When I asked her who it was, she smiled. Nobody. Miss Jessel, Flora's old governess, also dead. Suicide in the lake. I began to keep notes, verbal cues, repeated phrases. Flora's syntax shifted when she mentioned Jessel. Her words mimicked older rhythms. Miles, too. His speech became layered with effect. Phrases a boy his age wouldn't know. Latin, legalese, things Quint might have said. I confronted them. They denied it all. But one night I found Miles whispering to the empty fireplace, not in English, in perfect mimicry of Quint's voice. Mrs. Gross said I was exhausted. That grief had softened my reason. But I know psycholinguistic corruption. I've studied how language encodes trauma, how children echo what they've heard in ways adults miss. These children weren't haunted, they were mirroring, repeating words not their own, smiling like puppets. And then I saw Miss Jessel, soaked, crying at Flora's bedside. Flora was asleep, but her lips moved, whispering syllables I couldn't decipher. And Miles began sleepwalking. I told myself I could protect them, shield them, so I watched. Every night, I followed the whispering, listened at doors. Then one dawn, Miles vanished. I found him in the schoolroom, standing alone, smiling, pale. Is he here? I asked. He nodded. He's inside. And he tapped his own chest. I begged him to fight, to say something that was truly his. He looked up, eyes wide, lips parted. But the words that came out were not his voice. He died in my arms. No wound, no sign of struggle, just stopped breathing like a candle snuffed. Flora wouldn't look at me. Mrs. Gross took her away. I was left alone in Bly. The children were gone. The ghosts were gone. But the language remained. Words etched into the walls in invisible ink. Voices in my sleep speaking in Miles's tone. Repeating that final whisper. He's inside. Now when I speak, sometimes it's in a voice not my own. When I write, my handwriting changes. I know what people say, that I lost my mind, that I killed a boy out of hysteria. But I was a linguist, a psychologist. I know possession when I see it. And sometimes it doesn't take demons or ghosts. Sometimes it's a sentence, a phrase repeated too many times. A child learning the wrong lesson, and Bly is still there, empty, waiting, with a mirror in the tower, and two shadows that never left the lake. If you go there, don't speak to the children, especially if they smile and say, "We're ever so happy you're here."